I never imagined that I would see my parents once more. Not after 20 years of silence. Not after becoming a mother at 16. And most definitely not after creating the kind of life they had previously declared I would never merit. However, they were standing in the aisle of the courtroom, whispering and grinning smugly as though their luck had finally turned. They thought they had me trapped. They thought I would be crushed by the law. They were unaware of my new identity. The weight of the gavel I was now carrying was unknown to them. Furthermore, they had no idea that their own attorney was about to pass them, pause in front of me, and utter the words that would make their faces go white. "Judge, good morning." My story didn't really start until then, in that breathless, paused instant. People frequently think that a judge's life has been orderly and straight, like a perfectly ruled piece of lined paper. They envision tidy choices, peaceful days, and well-organized years. They don't envision mayhem or sobbing into a pillow at night. They can't imagine a girl who used to stand on a chilly doorstep with nothing but a plastic grocery bag full of clothes. However, that was me, 16, pregnant, and by myself. And I was placed there by my parents, Harold and Denise. I can still clearly recall the night it happened in late October, when the sky was dark and empty and the wind already seemed like November. With her arms folded and her gaze alert, my mother sat at the kitchen table. Behind her, my father paced as if he prayed the floor would split open and engulf me. They refrained from screaming. I nearly hoped they had. Screaming is a sign of feeling, screaming is a sign. "So you're going to leave tonight," she concluded. They refrained from uttering the word pregnant, as though doing so would negate the existence of my life. I recall looking down at my hands and wondering how odd it was that the same hands that had carried a pen at school that morning were now bearing the weight of a choice that wasn't even mine. My grandmother's house, which had always felt like a haven, was the only place I could go. Grandma Margaret has been a widow for nearly 20 years. The woman who, despite losing her taste for sweetness, prepared pies for every church function. The woman who operated a small vegetable stall on the edge of her land because I live longer when I converse with people. A woman who was able to overlook brutality. I didn't even say anything when she opened the door that evening. Holding that absurd plastic bag, I just stood there shivering. She gave me a brief glance, and I can assure you that she was well aware of everything. She moved away as her gaze softened. "Come in, baby," she said in a whisper. No judgment, no lecture, just warmth. I fell into her embrace. She held me like if she had been waiting for me all my life. She put me in the guest room with fresh linens, a small lamp by the window, and a hand-stitched bedspread made by her own mother. She perched on the edge of the bed, handed me tea, and said the first nice thing I had heard all night. "You're not by yourself, not while I'm still breathing." I experienced a feeling other than worry for the first time since seeing the pink line on the test. I felt secure. I became the pregnant girl that everyone spoke about at school. The person whose parents expelled her. High school judgment is acute but fleeting. The judgment that comes from your own blood is the. She took me to doctor's visits in her vintage blue-painted Chevy pickup. Despite my insistence that I wasn't hungry, she made me porridge every morning. I didn't think I was strong until she informed me. "You'll get through this," she remarked frequently. "You don't realize how tough you are." She didn't have much money, yet she spent it all on the items I needed, including baby supplies, vitamins, and pregnancy clothes. Coupons were clipped by her as if it were a second job. From her vegetable stand, she saved every penny. In retrospect, I believe Mom began saving for me long before she disclosed it to anyone. She would sit with me on the porch swing during the final months of my pregnancy. On the country road, we would watch automobiles drive by, their headlights shining through the towering maples. She would ask, "What do you want out of life?" I had no idea how to respond. I lived in a world of tiny diapers, doctor visits, and living day by day. At last, I responded, "I just want to give my baby something better than what I had." She gave my hand a squeeze. "You will, too." Grandma literally ran into the hospital lobby and waved her pocketbook like a flag as I went into labor. The nurses grinned. They cherished her. Everybody did. And I sobbed in a way that felt purifying when my son was eventually put in my arms, small, warm, and smelling like a new beginning. Grandma also shed tears. "You did it, baby," she said. "You are now a mother." I wasn't the girl my parents had abandoned at that precise time. They claimed I had made a mistake, but I wasn't. I was a new person with a purpose and a future, even if I had no idea how difficult it would be to achieve it. A common misconception is that life ends when you reach 16 and become a mother. However, mine didn't end at all. It just got heavier, like if I had to hold up two futures instead of just one. Jacob, my son, required everything. Feedings, changing diapers, going to the doctor, stability, warmth, and love. Grandma provided us with a roof, but I was responsible for the rest. The first several months were a whirl of resolve and restless nights. I recall doing algebra homework with one hand while rocking Jacob at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning. Pretending to have just woken up, Grandma would stumble in wearing her old flannel robe and gently remove him from my arms. "Finish your work," she would instruct. "Quitting won't help you create a future." It was expectation rather than merely encouragement. She had a strong belief in me, and I didn't want to let her down. Through an alternate program that allowed me to study while taking care of a newborn, I completed my high school education. The next spring, Jacob was in Grandma's lap with a small blue bow tie on when I crossed that stage. My parents failed to show up. I told myself it didn't matter. However, something inside of me sagged like an old porch post when I witnessed other children embracing their parents. Nevertheless, I turned to see Granny blowing me a kiss, her pride radiating from her like sunshine. I started working late into the night at the neighborhood grocery shop after graduating, bagging goods and pushing carts in the sweltering heat. I wasn't afraid of hard effort. The thought of being motionless terrified me. I would make the same commitment to myself in a whisper each time I punched the time clock. This won't last forever. However, funds were limited, a reminder that I couldn't depend on her indefinitely, that she wasn't young, and that her time was limited. One afternoon, a contractor attempted to con her, and that was the turning moment. He attempted to bill her hundreds of dollars up advance, claiming that her roof needed immediate repairs. Grandma narrowed her eyes, straightened her back, and said, "Young man, I wasn't born yesterday." But he refused to give up. I entered with composure, firmness, and unexpected self-assurance. "We're not signing anything, sir. I'll call the sheriff if you don't go." Faster than a cat off a hot pan, he was gone. Afterward, Grandma gave me an impressed look. She said, "You ever thought about law?" I'm a girl who once sobbed in the school restroom after someone scribbled "ruined" on my locker. However, the more I considered it, the more it made sense. The law was more than merely regulations. It was about defending those who had no one to defend them. Like myself and Grandma, I decided to enroll at a community college. I studied during Jacob's naps, read case studies while stirring spaghetti sauce, and listened to lectures through cheap earbuds while folding laundry. Every assignment felt like chiseling a tiny piece of a new future. I took a second job cleaning offices after hours because money was still tight. I'd wear Jacob in a baby sling as I vacuumed and emptied garbage bins. He would occasionally nod off against my chest while the vacuum cleaner hummed. "One day you'll understand why Mommy works so hard," I would mumble as I planted a kiss on the top of his head. Jacob was in kindergarten when I eventually moved to a state university to complete my bachelor's degree. "That's me and Mommy and Grandma," he would declare with pride as he brought stick figures and drawings of houses home. "We haven't discussed my parents yet." Grandma handled my law school admission letter like a priceless jewel on the day I received it. "Baby, you're going to change lives," she muttered. It was a demanding law school. 3 years of studying late at night with cheap coffee, reading until my eyes became blurry, and rehearsing arguments in front of the bathroom mirror. Failure was not an option for me, therefore even though I wasn't the youngest in my class, I was the most driven. I couldn't afford to give up. Fearful that I would disappoint everyone, I took the bar exam with trembling palms. I sobbed on my knees in the living room when the results were announced and I saw my name on the pass list. Grandma gave me a hug and rocked me just like she had the night I arrived at her house. "You did it," she sobbed. "It was done by my girl." I learned everything I didn't learn in law school during my early years as a public defender. How to communicate with those who have nothing left to lose. How to maintain a bright mind and a soft heart. How to fight battles that weren't always won. I discovered that although the system had flaws, there was still hope. No matter how tiny, every victory served as fuel. Our life gradually stabilized as Jacob grew older. We made a small save. We repaired the damaged items. The used car we purchased didn't stall at stop signs. Simple things, but after years of barely making ends meet, they felt luxurious. I was then appointed assistant district attorney in my early 30s. Celebrate, Grandma made an apple pie. Even though he was now a teenager, Jacob hugged me despite rolling his eyes. Life seemed full, stable, and secure. However, life has a tendency to change suddenly. Grandma passed out in her garden one afternoon. With dirt on her palms she was elderly, and sometimes bodies just decide they've had enough, so they did what they could. "You gave me 20 extra years, baby," she said, holding my hand in the hospital. "Don't you grieve excessively." Even though I was an adult woman with a job, a house, and a boy of my own, I sobbed by her bedside like a child. It was like losing the cornerstone of my whole life when I lost her. 2 nights later, she quietly passed away. The hardest thing, in my opinion, was saying goodbye. I had no idea that the true shock, which would alter my entire outlook on the future, was still to come. The home seemed excessively solemn and silent in the days following Grandma's death, as though even the walls were in mourning. I kept expecting to hear the subtle creak of her beloved rocker in the corner or the shuffling of her slippers on the hardwood floors. However, every time I passed through the rooms, all I could hear was the hollow hum of silence, the kind that squeezes and wraps around your ribcage. Although sadness weighs heavily on a home, Jacob made an effort to appear strong. He would linger at her bedroom doorway, gazing at her well-folded quilts, the framed photos from the church potluck, and the small collection of porcelain birds she kept on her dresser. He once said, "It doesn't feel right." She was present at all times. I drew him in and whispered, "I know." "Well, get through it." The funeral was straightforward, just the way she desired. She enjoyed hymns, a tiny choir, and a little church. Farmers, pensioners, old clients of her vegetable stand, and women from her quilting club were among the community members who attended. I had never heard the stories they told me. She never boasted about her acts of generosity. One woman said, "Your grandma once gave me groceries when my husband lost his job," with bright eyes. "She fixed my fence herself after a storm," an elderly man remarked. "She lent me money when I was sick," someone else muttered. With each recollection, I came to understand that Grandma had silently carried not only me but also huge sections of our community. She never desired praise. She simply acted morally. Following the funeral, Mr. Whitaker, the local lawyer, invited me to visit his office a few days later. I was uneasy because of his soft, almost hesitant tone, but I figured it was just the standard paperwork you deal with after someone passes away: accounts, assets, canceling utilities, probate papers, the unglamorous side of loss. I drove to his Main Street office 2 days later. It was a small brick structure that was sandwiched between a bakery and a barber shop, and even in the afternoon, it smelled like cinnamon buns. The waiting area featured fading periodicals from 5 years ago and mismatched seats, giving the impression that time had stopped. Whitaker led the way inside. He had homosexual hair, was in his 70s, and had glasses that fell down his nose as he spoke. Paper stacks, a green banker's lamp, and a photo of his grandchildren dressed for Halloween littered his desk. He said softly, "Thank you for coming," and shut the door. "Please sit." I sat down in the chair across from him. He could see that my palms were cold. "I am aware that the timing is challenging. Margaret, your grandmother, was meticulous in her preparation," although he started out gently. "She left some instructions and a will." I braced myself and nodded. He took a folder from his desk, opened it, and adjusted his spectacles. "You were designated as your grandmother's only beneficiary." I blinked, perplexed. "That makes sense. She had very little." His gaze grew softer. "She did, in fact. The room was filled with an odd silence. He claimed that a development business purchased some of her farmland, the forested acres behind her home, a number of years ago. I was aware of the area, but I had always thought it was nothing more than trees, paths, dilapidated fencing, and the abandoned barn where I used to play as a kid. Whitaker went on, she sold the land quietly. Never used a single penny of it. She demanded that the funds be kept secure. For the girl who one day needs a fresh start. My throat constricted. How much? I muttered. His throat was cleaned. The amount comes to almost $1.6 million after the land sale, investments, and accrued interest. The number struck me like a sharp, dizzying physical force. Certain that I had misheard, I clutched the armrest. I said it again, 1.6 million. He gave a soft nod. I am aware of how overpowering it is. Everything was meticulously prepared by her. She wanted to ensure that you and your kid had stability, security, and a future that she thought was rightfully yours. With trembling shoulders, I put both hands over my face. This was not happiness. Gratitude was wrapped around loss, and it hurt in a way that only true love can. Grandma had lived a frugal life, cutting coupons and wearing the same winter coat for years in order to leave me something that she had never liked. Tears obscured the room. I wish she had informed me that I had whispered. He responded, you'd insist she spend it on herself. She also wanted you to start standing on your own 2 feet. That sounded just like her. The ensuing weeks were filled with account transfers, legal paperwork, and quiet times when I would catch myself staring at her vacant chair and hoping I could express to her how much this meant. I took my time spending the money. I established a tiny scholarship fund for adolescent mothers who are attempting to I carefully kept the remainder, resolved not to squander a gift so rich in meaning, and donated to local legal aid organizations that had previously assisted us. In my anguish, I nearly forgot that there were people other than my parents, Harold and Denise, who had removed me from their lives 20 years prior, and Grandma, who still went by her last name. Before I was ready to hear their voices once more, they learned about the inheritance. A voicemail was the first step. My phone buzzed while I was clicking folders under my arm heels in the courthouse hallway. Hi, this is your dad. I froze. Margaret's will was mentioned to me. We ought to have a conversation. Then my mother's voice was practiced and clipped. Give us a call back. It's crucial. My stomach constricted. I didn't answer the phone. A letter arrived 2 days later. Formal tone and neat handwriting. We think we were entitled to the inheritance. A fraction is anticipated to be moved. If required, we will pursue legal action. Legal action. They desired the cash. I'm not sorry. No recognition of the years they left me behind. I gripped the paper with trembling hands. They demanded a fortune left by the woman who saved my life, even though I hadn't heard from them in 20 years. However, the reality of life is that storms seldom occur in isolation. 1 week later, their car was parked in front of me when I pulled into my driveway. They had returned, but not for Jacob, not for me, and not for peace. The last present from the woman who gave me everything had been returned for 1.6 million. I felt something I hadn't felt in years when I got out of my car and saw my parents standing on my yard. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, like I was 16 again, waiting for the next strike. The first person to speak was my father. We need to talk, he said, his voice flat as if the last 20 years were nothing more than a pause in a conversation. I didn't invite them inside. Instead, I kept one hand on my car door, ready to shut it if I needed to. About what? My mother clutched her purse against her chest the same way she used to hold on to her judgments. You know why we're here? Then I'll save you time, I said. The answer is no. Her lips thinned the way they always did when something didn't go her way. This isn't just about you. That land belonged to our family. And Grandma chose to leave it to me, I replied, with his mouth clenched. My father took a step forward. She wasn't feeling good. She had no idea what she was doing. He knew that was a lie. At 72, Grandma was more astute than most individuals at 50. Up until the very end, her thoughts had been clear, clearer than his sense of propriety, anyway. My voice remained steady. She meticulously prepared her will. Long before she became ill, she made her own judgments. My mom scoffed. You were manipulated by her. You were always spoiled by her. The charge struck like a chill wind, but I didn't back down. Instead, I straightened up. She cherished me. That is not the same. My dad's gaze became stern. We will have a conversation before we depart. I answered, then you'll be standing here for a while. Before they could object, I moved past them and went inside, shutting the door. As I locked it, my hands trembled. Their presence still has the power to frighten me, even after all these years. But now I wasn't helpless, which made Jacob observed me from the other side of the room. His face were clouded by stress. Mom, he said. What is it? I moved the documents in his direction. As he read, his eyes grew wide. This is not something they can accomplish. They left you behind. I know, I muttered. So what now? I let out a slow breath. Now we fight. Legal papers, consultations, and awkward encounters in courthouse conference rooms filled the ensuing weeks. I was unable to speak for myself. There would have been a conflict of interest. However, I located a lawyer. Rachel D.S. was a woman I trusted. Astute, unwavering, and straightforward. She arched an eyebrow after looking over the case file. She answered, they have nothing to stand on. The will is sealed. Your granny followed the text exactly. I said, that won't stop them. No, Rachel concurred. However, the truth will. She was correct. However, those motivated by pride, rage, or greed are not deterred by the truth. My parents had all three as well. People muttered everywhere I walked in the town. I was pied by some. Some people gave my parents a shake of their heads. Despite the fact that word spreads quickly in small communities, some people feigned to be ignorant. A woman approached me cautiously one afternoon as I was standing in line at the grocery store. I'm sorry about what you're going through, she whispered. I forced a grin. Thank you. She leaned in. Everyone is aware that Margaret wanted the best for you. She would be pleased. I was unexpectedly steadied by her comments. Long before the money, my grandmother gave me pride and affection. Rachel carried her suitcase like a shield as she strolled next to me. My parents and their lawyer, Richard Hall, a tall, well-groomed man, were standing close to the door. He appeared to be a person who charged by the minute and played golf on the weekends. When they saw me, they grinned, their posture exuding a smug confidence. Dad laughed when Mom leaned close to whisper something. They genuinely thought they would prevail. I wasn't upset by what I saw. I was just depressed about it. It was disappointing that they hadn't even slightly softened after 20 years. There was a lot of conversation within the courtroom. Benches made of wood creaked, there was a hint of lemon cleaning polish and old paper in the air. When I sat down, I felt eyes on me, some sympathetic, some curious, some stunned to see the daughter they once shamed now sitting poised and composed. I maintained a regular breathing pattern while we waited for the judge to arrive. You ready? Murmured Rachel. I must be. The bailiff moved to the front. Everyone gets up. The judge, who was not a close associate of mine, took the bench. My parents looked at one another, still oblivious to the change that was about to take place. Then the side hallway door opened once more. Their lawyer walked into the courtroom. Richard Hall, his silver tie clip catching the overhead light, his leather briefcase, and his assured gait. Expecting him to greet them with the warmth of an ally, my parents straightened and grinned brightly. Rather, he simply strolled by them. He came to a stop before me. He gave a profound, almost reverent nod of respect before saying, "Good morning, Judge," in a steady, clear voice that reverberated throughout the quiet courtroom. My folks froze. My father's face lost its color after my mother's. As though they had just discovered the truth, their eyes grew wide with bewilderment and then dread. The girl they left behind. They thought the girl was beneath them. Did their own attorney answer to the judge? The ground beneath their feet changed in that instant, and they were aware of it. The courtroom remained motionless for a considerable amount of time, as though the air itself was unsure of what to do. The overhead light appeared to be humming even louder. I sat motionless because all of my emotions were colliding, not because I was proud or triumphant. Disbelief, sorrow, relief, and something more profound. Unexpectedly, I felt a strange feeling of closure. I shall always remember the faces of my parents. My father blinked quickly, his mouth opening slightly as if he wanted to protest reality itself, and my mother's hand shook as she gripped her pocketbook, knuckles white. They thought I was the weakest person in the courtroom when they entered. Rather, they were learning that I had dedicated 20 years to being someone they never thought I could be. "You okay?" Rachel said as she leaned in close. "Yes," I muttered. "I'm okay." Richard Hall, the lawyer for my parents, made a stiff, almost ashamed gesture to straighten his tie. The bench required respect regardless of personal relationships, therefore even though it was difficult for a guy like him to show deference to someone half his age, he did so without hesitation. He disregarded my parents for the time being as they frantically glanced at him in an attempt to signal him over. Rather, he sat down at their table, cleared his throat, and gave the sitting judge a courteous nod. "Shall we proceed?" the judge asked calmly after adjusting his glasses and looking between us. The room suddenly let out a breath, and the hearing started. On paper, at least, my parents' lawyer got off to a great start. He claimed that I had somehow tricked my grandmother into. However, hyperbole can only go so far. Evidence is what matters, and the evidence did not support their position. Rachel laid down the timeline in a composed manner. Every financial statement processed through legal procedures, every document signed by witnesses, every medical evaluation demonstrating Grandma's mental clarity. She displayed the receipts from Grandma's land sale, her investments, and her tax returns, all of which were well organized, consistent, and structured, exactly like Grandma's life. Rachel stated she wasn't perplexed. She was purposeful. My throat constricted. Thoughtful. That was Grandma, indeed. Rachel went on, "Moreover, Your Honor, the petitioners, Mr. and Mrs. Dawson, had no contact with the decedent for over 20 years. My dad writhed. With forced dignity, my mother straightened. A file was opened by Rachel. Here are school records, medical forms, and statements from former teachers, verifying that the respondent." She gestured toward me was abandoned by both parents at age 16, pregnant, and without resources. The courtroom was filled with a low ripple. People were aware of parts of the story, but it was another to hear it formally on oath. Like a toddler exposing a broken vase, my mother gave me a scathing, accusing look as though I had told on her. Hissing something, she leaned forward her lawyer. He remained silent. He just stroked his forehead, seemingly perplexed as to how he had ended up in this predicament. With a steady, unwavering voice, Rachel continued. There was quiet, no communication, no financial assistance, and no attempts at reconciliation. The judge took notes while gently nodding. The judge became still as well. My parents, meanwhile, sat rigidly, their faces taking on a brittle quality akin to thin ice breaking on a pond. My father attempted to regain his feet when he eventually joined the stand. He said, "I didn't leave her. She departed." Rachel retorted, "She left because you threw her out." His eyes flicked toward me as he gulped. We were overpowered. She was too young. Although it was awkward, we believed she would grow up. A lesson. My ribs were pressed up against that old, familiar agony. Rachel remained silent. She didn't have to. And what did her 16-year-old homelessness teach her? My dad's mouth constricted. She made decisions. You did too, Rachel said. He stopped talking. My mother tried an alternative strategy when she testified. Weeping. Her voice faltered. In her palms, she twisted a tissue. She said, "I loved my daughter. I still do." Rachel arched an eyebrow. How many birthdays did you call her for throughout those 20 years? My mom dabbed at her eyes. Not one. Graduations? Not one. Have you had a chance to meet your grandson? More tears? No. Have you sent a letter, a card, or anything else? She gave a headshake. Do you think that's what loving parents do, Mrs. Dawson? My mom gazed at her hands. Her silence spoke more than any response. The truth was exposed like an unrolled scroll across the courtroom by the time both sides had completed their presentations. The hard, unwavering truths of who we were, without any theatrics or shouting. In the grand narrative sense, Margaret Dawson used her full potential and acted on her own initiative. Her goals were obvious. There is no legal foundation for giving the petitioners any share of the estate. My parents tensed up. He went on to say that this court's decision is that the distribution petition is completely denied. Denied a single word, but it reverberated across the room like a gavel blow. With a quiet gasp, my mother covered her mouth. As if a lifetime of spoken sorrows had suddenly become more weighty, my father's shoulders drooped slowly, almost delicately, as if he were touching delicate glass. Their lawyer closed his briefcase. Rachel put her hand on my arm. It's finished. However, it didn't seem to be over. Not quite yet. Because victory does not equate to closure. Years of neglect cannot be undone by victory. The 16-year-old girl who once stood by herself on a porch, shivering in the dark, is not healed by victory. My parents were smaller than I had ever seen them as they stood together as the courtroom cleared out. I became aware of their advanced age for the first time. Their conviction was disturbed, their posture was weaker, and their facial creases were deeper. There was a part of me that wished I could pass them silently, but I was stopped by another portion, the part that Grandma had raised. With weary eyes, my father looked up. He said, "We never should have." My mom took a deep breath. "We had no idea you would turn into this." I looked them in the eye. I whispered, "If you had stayed, you could have known." Neither responded. They averted their gaze out of embarrassment rather than pride. For the first time in my life, I recognized them as two incredibly flawed, incredibly human individuals who had made bad decisions and were now bearing their own emotional costs rather than as the monsters of my past. I sat by myself on one of the benches and waited for the hush to settle once the courtroom had cleared out. My hands were motionless and solid on my lap, but my thoughts was moving like a leisurely river, steady but carrying a lot of information beneath the surface. It should have felt great to win. There ought to have been an overpowering flood of satisfaction and a moment of vindication. Rather, I just felt empty. It seemed hollow, like if too many bits of my past had been churned up at once and the dust had not yet settled, rather than broken or victorious. Rachel gently touched my shoulder as she packed her folders. "Compared to most people, you handled today with more grace." "Thank you," I murmured. "You want me to walk you out?" "I'll be okay. All I need is a minute." She nodded, squeezed my arm, and left me in the quiet. It wasn't the victory that weighed on me. It was the sight of my parents' faces. Shock first, then dread, then embarrassment. I didn't want to pity them, but part of me couldn't stop it. They had clung to pride for so long that when it broke, they had nothing else to cling to. Silently, the bailiff moved closer. "The building is about to close, Judge." Naturally, old tendencies caused me to straighten. "I'm grateful." Even though I wasn't technically on the bench today, being referred to as judge still put me in that comfortable position of accountability. After gathering my briefcase and coat, I headed for the calmer exit via the back stairs. I heard footsteps behind me as I dropped. "Hold on." I pivoted. My dad. He appeared smaller, not physically, but spiritually, like a man who had at last been compelled to examine the life he had created and seen its shortcomings. A few paces behind him, my mother's eyes were crimson from tears as she clutched her handbag once more. I didn't approach. My mom blinked away her tears. "We had no knowledge of your life." "Who made that decision?" I asked softly. Neither responded. My dad adjusted his weight. In every way, we were mistaken. Now we are aware of that. My mom took a deep breath. Although we can't undo what we did, we didn't. This did not turn out the way we had anticipated. I asked, "You expected to win?" After a moment of hesitation, she calmly confessed. Indeed. Hearing the truth expressed honestly had a raw, almost painful quality. I heard no justifications, excuses, or attempts to change the past. They weren't protecting themselves for the first time. They turned to face themselves. My father remarked, "We are no longer requesting money. We are aware of our defeat." I said, "That's not what matters." He scowled a little. "What is important?" I inhaled slowly. "The fact that you only returned when there was a benefit." Their faces twisted with remorse rather than rage. My mom's voice broke. "We were cowards." My dad gave a nod. "We felt ashamed, and individuals who are ashamed tend to make bad choices." None of us said anything for a long time. 2 decades of stillness weighed heavily on the air between us. At last, I whispered, "I needed you when I was a child, not now." Stifling a sob, my mother covered her mouth. In an attempt to regain his balance, my father blinked multiple times. "We'll carry that because we know." I took a close look at them. They were no longer youthful. Their eyes were dimmer than the ones I recalled, their hair was gray, and their shoulders bent with age. The same lines that life had chiseled into me had also been carved into them. However, I had another important person waiting for me. Jacob. He would likely be pacing the kitchen when he got home, eager to find out how the day had gone. "We're sorry," my mother said in a whisper while wiping her eyes. "Really?" I gave one nod, just acknowledgement, not rejection or forgiveness. "Take care of yourselves," I urged. After that, I passed them. When I entered, Jacob was tapping his fingers nervously at the kitchen table. "You're home," he exclaimed, leaping to his feet. "What took place? Did we prevail?" "Did they?" I whispered, "We won." A look of relief crossed his face. "Excellent. They were deserving." I held up a hand. "They remain your grandparents." He paused. "Are they?" "They never behaved that way." I motioned for him to join me as I took a seat at the table. "Jacob, people make mistakes. Large ones. Additionally, people can fail to recognize the harm until it is too late." He crossed his arms and scowled. "What now?" "Right now?" For something so complex, what a straightforward question. I said, "I don't know. But this family, not ours, will not be defined by rage." He became softer. "That's what Grandma would have said." I grinned. She would have. The weight of the day settled about us as we sat there for some time. That night, the house seemed different, not because anything had changed, but rather because the ghosts of my past had finally emerged from the shadows and I understood they were no longer in control of me. I went outside to the porch later that evening after Jacob had gone to bed. It was peaceful and cold, the kind of silence that envelopes you like a blanket. I gazed up at the dark, starry sky that Grandma would have referred to as God's freckles. "I hope I made you proud," I muttered. As if in response, the wind rustled the old maple tree's leaves. Grandma had given me everything, love, stability, and strength, but her greatest gift to me wasn't money, rather, it was the ability to firmly stand in who I had become, a woman with a career, a son, a home, a future, and a heart that still had room for mercy, rather than the girl my parents had abandoned or the mistake they believed me to be. Today's victory provided truth rather than happiness. And sometimes the first step to recovery is the truth. After years of holding my breath, life became calmer and quieter in the weeks following the court case. It was almost like taking a deep breath. However, mending seldom happens all at once. It arrives in tiny waves. It sometimes shows up when you're resisting and other times when you don't anticipate it. I got a letter a few days after the ruling. It was a genuine letter in my mother's handwriting, not an email or an SMS. When I was younger, she wrote my name on school permission slips using the same handwriting. I opened it after a moment of hesitation. Jacob observed me curiously while crunching cereal at the counter. "Are you all right?" "Yes," I replied, albeit in a softer tone than I meant to. "I'm just unsure about what's inside." He cocked his head. "Would you like me to leave?" "No, I told them to stay." I opened the envelope cautiously, as if hurrying would cause the paper to shatter. There was only one page within. No demands, no justifications, and no charges. This was just stated in a letter. We were mistaken. We had no idea how to be parents. Pride was more important to us than you. What we did cannot be undone. We are aware that you owe us nothing. But Mom and Dad, we're here if you ever want to talk. I folded the note, my hands shaking a little. Jacob bent over. "What will you do?" I honestly said. He was correct. I made the decision on my own for the first time in my life. I didn't immediately respond. Time was what I want. It's time to reflect, to take a deep breath, and to let the past to coexist with the present without being overwhelming. Under the gentle glow of porch lights, I spent more evenings on the porch, the same spot where Grandma and I had once discussed life. I closed my eyes and wondered what my grandmother would say if she were at my side as I swung softly on the swing one evening. To defend yourself, you don't need to despise them. Perhaps forgiveness does not entail forgetting. It simply means that you avoid being poisoned by it. She had always managed to make the things that scared me seem less complicated. With a blanket around his shoulders, Jacob joined me on the porch. "Are you considering her?" I said. "I think about her all the time." He gave a nod. "Her crinkle-eyed smile is what I miss." I agree. We sat together, taking in the gentle chirping of nighttime crickets and the far-off sound of a neighbor's dog barking. Grief had its own sluggish pace, but life had progressed all around us. "Are you going to meet them?" Jacob asked after a protracted period of silence. I let out a soft sigh. Perhaps only to admit it, rather than to cure everything. "I'll accompany you if you do." I grinned. "I'm grateful." He gave a shrug. "We work as a team." We were, too. I decided a few days later. I didn't want our story to end with resentment. Not mine, not theirs. Not Jacob's either. The past will always exist, but perhaps it didn't have to control the future. I called the number listed at the bottom of my mother's letter after picking up the phone. That word was like a sudden burst of wind. I realized how long I had lived without hearing it, not because I thought it was true. I said, "I'm willing to meet in public, somewhere neutral." "Indeed." "Yes, without a doubt. Anytime, anywhere." We chose a little, unhistoric diner outside of town, the kind with vinyl booths and pies on display behind a glass case. They were already sitting when I got there, their anxious hands clasped on the table like students awaiting a principal's decision. I moved into the booth on the other side. At first, no one said anything. My dad cleared his throat. "I appreciate you coming." As though preparing herself, my mother reached for her glass of water. "We assumed you wouldn't." To be honest, I almost didn't. Avoiding things, however, just makes them more powerful. They exchanged a look that was more akin to humility than manipulation. My mom was the first to speak. "We were awful parents." "Worse than awful," my father nodded. I felt an odd mixture of relief and anguish. Although they rarely completely heal scars, admissions of guilt can lessen their hold. I answered, "What you did slowly shaped my entire life. Every choice I made, every fear I carried, and every action I took was influenced by what transpired when I was 16. Both of them lowered their gazes. But I kept on. It also pushed me to become someone stronger than I ever imagined." My mom's voice trembled. "We don't expect forgiveness." "I'm not offering it," I said softly. "Not right now. Perhaps never. However, I'm ready to begin honestly." They gave a nod. "Just acceptance, not resistance or defensiveness. Quiet and long overdue." We spent about an hour conversing. It's about basic things, not about money or the trial. Once more, we were not family. However, we were no longer strangers with blades fashioned from past suffering. And that was sufficient. I took a car to the graveyard that night. The rows of headstones were illuminated by peach-colored light as the sun began to set. I brought some fresh flowers and laid them tenderly next to Grandma's grave. I murmured, I did my best. Not only in court, but also in the sections that follow. The trees were rustled by a breeze. A bird chirped twice in the vicinity, a faint echo of her pleasure. I hope I was able to make you proud. I shut my eyes and allowed the silence to settle in. I felt the weight of the past lesson for the first time in years, not completely gone, but lighter. I also felt a warm sensation in my chest as I made my way back to the car. Peace, not victory, not retaliation. I didn't get the future I desired in life. However, I constructed a different one. One molded by hardship, love, and the lady who filled in for others. And this is what I want people to learn from my tale. Although we have no control over the family we are born into, we do have control over the family we choose to form. You never know who is fighting a battle you can't see, so if my tale even somewhat moved you, I hope you'll share it, leave a thought, or just hold someone a little closer today. I appreciate you listening.